All right. Well, I'm going to go ahead and get started. Thanks to those of you that were able to arrive on time or arrive early. Excited to launch into our second of a series of webinars today. And today we're going to be talking about strategic service differentiation. Just also a logistical note, we're in webinar mode, so I apologize for any technical hiccups if there are any. And I hope that everyone's experience is as good as or better than it was last time. If you need anything, do um, raise your hand or drop things in the chat. I don't think everyone's going to be able to see the chat, but we've got folks monitoring, and we'll pause at various junctures for questions and so on as well. So we want each of these webinars to stand on their own. So if you were here last time, you might hear some of this again, but I'll go quickly through it. My name is Carl Allen. I'm the CEO and founder of Formative. I came into school transportation as a bit of an outsider. I'm an engineer, was a classroom teacher, a Peace Corps volunteer, a urban planning and public policy student. But then got into K-12, became a director of transportation at Boston Public Schools, also worked in the contractor private transportation realm, and then for charter schools, for a charter school network in North Minneapolis, specifically before starting Formative, and just coalesced with my co-founders around this idea that there was great opportunity in student mobility to transform how things were being done, and that the current system was stuck and not meeting the dynamic needs of learners and of schools. So Formative, our business, we manage multimodal mobility with technology with the aim of expanding options, enhancing service, while maintaining and enhancing safety and ensuring sustainability. And we think broadly about sustainability as operational, financial, environmental, and with the aim and the ultimate vision that all students have access to the learning opportunities that maximize their potential. And so that's very relevant to what we're going to talk about today with service differentiation. We work in a number of cities as a transportation manager and a broker. We subcontract vendors and manage them and do routing and customer service and so on. And then a big part of our work is also consultative, working with big districts and state systems and others. And this is part of our work that we've been doing in partnership with the Walton Family Foundation and Bellwether Education Partners, spreading ideas about new ways for mobility systems to function in this new world. So part of that work is creating a resource hub, and so that's this webinar, as our last webinar, is going to go up onto our student mobility hub.formative.org. We are also actively populating the content onto this website and this hub full of resources that include white papers and case studies, and then other outside resources as well, but hope that this can become a living and breathing place for folks to share new ideas, and that we'll continue to add to. And so this is just part of that work. I wanted to share quickly as a way to start. This was an article that we saw yesterday in the New York Times about learning loss. And just a quote in here that caught my attention and is just supremely relevant to the conversation, that even when schools offered interventions to help students catch up, lower income families might have been less able to rearrange schedules or transportation to ensure their children attended. So this is, I think, emblematic of one of these key demand dynamics we're talking about, which is the increased individualization of need and the need to be able to, for systems to adapt and offer services to meet these more individualized and complex needs of kids. So so I don't think this is a one-off from COVID, just like I don't think the driver shortage is a one-off from COVID. So, but COVID exposed a lot of things and exacerbated a lot of things, one of which is, exposing this gap here that we see here exemplified by this quote, that where some students, where students need extra help, in this case, it's catching up because of learning loss due to COVID, but where students need extra help, it's those that have private means to get there that can get that help or can access that opportunity, or it's those who's, and families who are well-resourced, who have flexible work schedules that are able to do that. And so I think what you see here again is just the power of transportation and district-provided transportation to bridge those gaps and the imperative for them to do so. And so this just, again, very timely, and I think really indicative of this broader dynamic we're talking about. I shared last time our theoretical framework, Formative's way of thinking about the current challenges of student mobility. And this is a simplified view of that framework. I've removed some of the text just to talk about it at a high level, because I could talk about it all day. But our core idea is this recognition that transportation is a fundamental access barrier, or it's that thing which can unlock equitable access. And so it's complicated at baseline. Existing challenges include, and this is our, again, an abstraction, our view of how to categorize these many problems. The first being policies and funding landscape are state-by-state patchwork that doesn't allow use of all the various tools that we could use, and is very complicated to navigate for operators and districts and others alike. And that it's different state by state and even locality by locality, which complicates things for operators, technology companies, and others that work across states. System fragmentation, this is just another symptom, another feature of the very localized education system within the United States. But as a consequence, districts and charters and all these other organizations are all going it alone and trying to stand up now increasingly complicated public transit systems on their own. And so there's just tremendous inefficiency and in that disconnect. And then capacity gaps, that is to say that we don't yet have the technology and the systems and people power to run the kinds of systems that we really need in this time. So, and I think these things have kind of always been true again, but COVID was an example of a exogenous event that happened that has just exposed a number of things. And so, but more recently, then the driver shortage, of course, is what everyone talks about and understands the most on the supply side, but also just the costs of services, the cost of inputs, the challenging labor market. These are supply dynamics that have hit, that were exposed by COVID, but again, are not going away and are just becoming harder and harder to navigate. And then on the demand side, that demand is becoming more and more complex, that student needs are becoming more and more complex and individualized, and they're wanting more customization, more choice. And so and lastly, this is not insignificant, but just expectations and demands in that respect have just gone up because of what we can do with Amazon and Uber and other things, that now families expect that school transportation systems should function this way. So this is why we're in such a pickle right now. So to address these challenges, we've created a framework of the kinds of solutions that we think are most promising. And so and just the way we've talked about the problem, there's a dimension of the solutions that are related to policy and funding, related to the design of the systems themselves, how they're working, and related to the organizations and people within those systems. But really all these solutions, everything is really cross-cutting. And so it's a simplification to say that it's just a policy and funding issue. Today, we're going to talk about differentiated support, which is probably, one of the most cross-cutting representations of a solution that we offer here, because in the framework, we're talking about the ability to do different things, the ability and how different modalities and different types of supports are supported and allowed. That's why it's in that policy and funding bucket. But really, the ability to differentiate support also, critically depends on having those systems and those alternatives and how they connect, right? So it's part of delivery systems, and it's also requires that you have data systems and technology systems and people that can operate in a much more sophisticated way and not a kind of one-size-fits-all simplified way. So this is what we're going to talk about today, is differentiated support based on local context and needs. And it's a really, really rich topic. So what does it mean? So is it, I think you might be thinking, Does this just mean, making things more efficient, dialing things back, you know, community stops, having, setting new boundaries, kind of austerity measures? Is that what it means? Or are we talking about, you know, more vans, more hop, skip, drive, more personalized service? Is that what you're talking about, individualized service? Does that mean it has to be more accommodating and more expensive for everyone? Well, no, it's kind of, it's kind of neither of those things, but also could be a little bit of both of those things, right? What it really means, what we're talking about, is a smart deploying of the right solution to each student to address their particular barriers to accessing learning and enrichment. So, it's like a big government or small government debate, right? Really, what we want is a smarter system here, right? It's not, in some cases, it's we encounter systems in almost all cases where there's individualized need, right, that's not being met. So we need more supports, more specialized, more expensive service for some. But then surely, in those same systems, there are students that are, where there's service that they're not even using, right? Or there are students that definitely could walk a little bit further to a bus stop and so on, that systems have become too accommodating, too brittle, and need to be dialed back for the sake of efficiency. So it's really about finding the right solution, the right mix of solutions that's allowed, and that where those options are available, and that you can muster the will and the capability to deploy. So why should we do this? The idea, there's a good educational analog to this idea, which is that we differentiate in the classroom. There's this idea that a teacher's time and their personal attention is very scarce and precious, and we can't afford, we know every kid would do better with one-on-one time with their teacher all the time with a one-on-one tutor, but as a public system, we can't afford to do that. So we think about differentiating the instruction is that everyone gets a high level of core service, and then others need more one-on-one time or small group times, and we do this with mental health supports, but yet we don't apply this lens to student transportation. If if we buy that one size fits none, then this idea that, and we do in instruction, right? Everyone needs and learns differently and needs different support. Then this idea of yellow bus for everyone, or kind of the traditional model, or a binary model of like it's either yellow bus or it's door-to-door van service. That's not going to meet every student's needs either, and then needs and are very different, and so are the barriers that students face and their families' ability to bridge the gap between what schools offer and what they need. These are all very different. So differentiating service, or finding the right mix and the right solution for each individual kid, not only ensures that they receive that, but it also ultimately it's about making the most efficient and strategic use of your resources, which improves. And so then this doesn't just save money, it also ultimately improves service quality and reliability and benefits everyone. So this idea that, if you were to try to stretch a teacher and have them spend one-on-one time with every kid, probably at baseline, the overall instruction results of the whole class would suffer, because it's a scarce resource. So similarly, within a school transportation system, if you end up promising or trying to offer door-to-door, highly accommodating service for everybody, you end up with a system that's very brittle and failure prone, and is not going to work very well, right? So there's a need to, again, find that right mix and dial back services or offer something different in different kinds of services and supports in different contexts, so that you've got then resources available to provide the more personalized, more expensive services to those that really need it. And ultimately, I talk about failure modes a lot, but a bus route, let's say with 20 door-to-door stops, has 20 places where something could break down, where something could go wrong, where a parent could ask for a few extra minutes to wait while we finish our cereal. But if that happens times 20, you've got a bus that's going to really struggle to get to school on time, and that downstream, the results are going to be highly variable to all those families down the line, and you're going to fail ultimately at delivering on your very high touch promises. Whereas that same route, if students are at corner stops, there's fewer places where things could break down. where an issue with one single student can break the system down. Fewer turns, literally just fewer places for vehicles to run into traffic or to skid out or do all the things, the variability that can happen. So you end up with a more resilient, more robust, and more reliable system that's higher performing and more reliable. So we ask, I often ask, districts to present this question to your family, right? To your families, would you trade a unit of reliability and on-time performance for if we asked you to walk a little bit further to a bus stop? But these are the real trade-offs that make a huge difference. All right, so I'm going to pause for a second, and hopefully Mary can jump in. I'll get a drink of water, but just want to, now that I've defined service differentiation a bit, before I go into some real practical examples and go deeper, just to get some of your thoughts at first blush about it. Mary?
Hi, yeah. So I think we're going to activate a poll for you guys. And Carly might need to exit screen. There it is. So we've got a question for everyone, and we're just interested in hearing from folks about how you're conceptualizing what are some of the practical barriers to differentiating student mobility service. So Carl painted a picture of, why high level it's important to think about differentiation, but practically, what are some of the challenges to doing so? So we put forward some of the common concerns that we've heard from schools and school systems across the country when we've worked with them to think about strategically differentiating their service. So high costs, operational complexity, just trying to figure out how to handle all these different modes and levels of service, lack of options, not knowing if, how can, all I have are yellow buses. I don't even know how to think about differentiating. Lack of knowledge. So this sounds good, but I don't know how to do it. Safety concerns around when we start to think about adding complexity or nuance, just how do we think about safety in all these different ways when we personalize? And then equity concerns. I understand that it's important to personalize service, and I want to ensure that I'm thinking about the equity implications as I do so, and that I'm bearing that in mind as I think about differentiating, and I do it in a thoughtful and intentional and unbiased way. So select all that apply. And then we're going to just see what the folks who are with us right now, what they've identified. I'm just going to give folks a little bit more time to fill out, and then Jesse can, or Carl, can you pull up the poll results so we can see how folks have answered?
Yeah, let me see. That's a great question. I can see them. If I put them up.
Here we go. So it's still open. So if you haven't responded yet, go ahead and do so. But it looks like operational complexity is leading the list in terms of what folks are seeing as barriers, with 89% of the folks gathered identifying that. But right behind it is cost. Over half of respondents being concerned about the cost implications around differentiating. And the lowest concern at 22%, but still valid, is around safety. So folks might feel a little bit more confident, and once I've personalized service, doing so in a safe manner. But it's really around cost and operational complexity. And we also have 44% that are thinking about equity. What does it, and the same thing in the classroom or in any sort of service that we're providing our students, we know that one size doing the same thing for every student is not equitable or efficient or effective. We want to make sure we really understand the implications of our choices when we're personalizing. Great. And so the last thing, this is a good place to start off, and hopefully we'll address all of these as we go through differentiation today. You'll notice in the webinar format that the chat is disabled, but you do have the option to enter in the Q&A section any sort of comments or questions, and our team is able to see those and we'll review those. And we're going to pause at a couple moments throughout the webinar to just surface some of the questions and comments we're seeing and respond to those to add on to the content that Carl's going to go through. Carl?
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Mary. Okay, so now that we've defined strategic differentiation a little bit more. So here's kind of how you would pull that off, right? So again, analogous to the instructional framework within the classroom, we've got to have strong core service for everybody. And so, this is your core network. Often it's mostly buses, but now increasingly there's vans or smaller vehicles. But what's our core, basic offering, basic services for everybody? And then let's make sure that we're doing that well first. So, is it on time? Is it, or is our utilization good? We talk about routed and actual utilization. Are we really making the most of these precious assets and drivers that we're putting out on the road? And none of this is, of course, trivial, but are we meeting our basic mandate? The students and the areas, the neighborhoods, zip codes we're supposed to be serving, and what's our satisfaction rate, right? So it's kind of, get the basics right, get your core system working well as a first step. Then consider, okay, what within our contexts, within the assets that are available here, the context of our unique students and communities and schools and what we're trying to accomplish, what other options are there? Is there public transit that's accessible, even to even to parts of our system? Are there rideshare, TNC related options that are allowable and in our market? Are there lots of resourced parents or, any parent that's doing a lot of the lifting of transportation already? Understanding that is really important, school by school, program by program. To what extent is that supplementing already out there that we can leverage and think about using? Stipends or direct to parent payments, is this something that we use? Is this something that's available to use? How is it being used? And in our neighborhoods and our pedestrian environments, how safe are those? But then also thinking about these availability of different assets for out of school time, meaning outside the regular school calendar, on the weekends, earlier, later, what assets are there? And also mentioning should mention other supply options, like just other outside bus vendors, for example, van vendors that might be in our marketplace that we use or may not avail ourselves of, depending on the situation. So then, after identifying this number 3 is a big one. So, making sense of what's there and then doing the hard work of kind of assessing who needs different sorts of supports or who could plausibly leverage things like public transit or who could actually walk or who really needs these extra supports or more door-to-door sedan service. This is, the meat of the how. So again, a lot there. I don't want to bury the lead, but then deploy them, right? Based on demonstrated need and unique context. So again, design, implementation, and then evaluate, right? So, but then recognize that, now we have this new system. We can't just put students on public transit or, say you're okay to walk, and then they're not part of our system anymore. So we don't measure on-time performance, or we don't measure satisfaction or safety, for students that aren't riding the bus. And this is another part of our just reconceiving mobility support as a broader thing than beyond just that which we traditionally conceive as the service we support. This is about really being intentional and aware of all the different modes that families are using, how we're supporting them, and keeping tabs on that, evaluating how we're doing, satisfaction, access, and so on, and maintaining as things change, because these things are dynamic. So this slide is also, there's a lot here, but just wanted to throw out a bunch of different ways that we could think of and that we've had experience with to different degrees, working with districts and charters and others, ways that service can be different, right? Things that people are doing or could do or can do in different contexts. And just for you to think about all these different dimensions. So it's not just about buses or vans, right? Or sedans, but there's different kinds of staff that can be deployed with different qualifications. There's in-house versus outsourced vendors. There's different ways to route. And there's, the typical conception in school transportation is that there's one trip. It goes, it picks up kids and brings them to school. And at the end of the day, it brings them home. But in public transit, we have different ideas of, we have circulators and shuttles, and we have trips and routes that run on a frequency, or routes that change and go to different places depending on time of day. So just opening our minds to different ways of thinking about frequency, service levels. We talk about distance that students and families have to go to get to a bus stop, and curb to curb or door to door are very common concepts, but really there's a whole spectrum there. Eligibility criteria, again, these are things that we do think about usually in a more blunt instrument sense, but how might those be different by program or by geography or by needs? Timing and how that can be adjusted. Again, use of public transit, stipends, carpool, rideshare. This is, leveraging technology or just leveraging those, what's already being done, kind of meeting families where they are. And if there's a lot of families that are driving, how can we leverage them, or, address situation at the curb, which might be, from an environmental standpoint and a logistical standpoint. We don't want every kid coming to school in a private car. So there's ways to be more intentional there, more intentionality around walking. And it's not just about crosswalks and crossing guards, but there you can also have, and we've seen this, did it in Boston, and there's places that do it really well, but walking school buses, right? So escorting students along a route with defined stops and so on. Even thinking then about other human supports and aids and travel training, other ways and communication, right? So this is, again, a thing, most of the time we encounter districts where there's room to do better in this regard, but not a lot of thought to, could we propose or implement an intervention where we specifically communicate differently with specific students, or offer different, wait times, or, policies around, having drivers actually go to the door and knock, or how many times we call or text who are chronically absent. So that's an example there. But again, a lot here. And this is part of a resource we're sharing on our hub as well, but wanting to just get us thinking broadly about all these different dimensions where things can be different. And then it's quite another thing to think about things being different, or planned differently versus actually, being strategic in differentiating, and then of course deploying. So now I want to talk a little more brass tacks about how do you actually do this. So starting with, some more common ones. Again, stop location. This is a big lever for efficiency, and a really important one that we do a lot of work with a lot of districts. I'll give you some examples on this, but it's simply put, different students in different grades or different programs, or by geography, or based on different factors, might be allowed to walk by, as a matter of policy and system design or system constraint, to go a little bit further to a bus stop. And I won't even say walk to a bus stop, because there's the idea a stop could be something like a community stop, or like a park and ride location for families. So that's another common way that stops exist. Often families are out there, especially in the cold weather here, driving their own students to stops. But many times districts have policies that appear, to be differentiated in the allowance that students by grade could walk or could travel to get to a bus stop. But again, quite another thing to implement it in a differential way. Not as frequent is that there are differentiations by program, but that's, increasingly becoming part of conversations that we're having, which is that, if we want to offer citywide programs or more programs of choice that, that have to travel much further in order to fit those routes into an hour, and allow those vehicles then to be tiered and serve multiple schools, the routes need to be simplified. Families need to go further to bus stops. And that's the trade of saying, okay, we're able to provide this new kind of access, this new opportunity, which and a higher degree of choice, but we have to dial back the service level promise that we can offer. So we can't pick up everyone at their door, but this is a program that's desirable. We've asked that families can get to these community stops. Varied route assignments. So again, a lot of districts have some concept of an alternative stop, or we serve daycare stops, or you can have, an after school stop, or something of that fashion. But again, quite a different thing to think about actually as a matter of course, just having a system that maybe is more fixed, but that which then, if it's more fixed, then could you, with proper tracking and communication, could you just allow students, like in a transit network, to traverse and roam more freely, route by route, day by day, depending on their schedule? So that's another example where kind of seemingly dialing back one service level, like stops are going to be more fixed and less accommodating for individuals. But yet we can offer more flexibility, because by virtue of doing that, dialing back one dimension, we can actually ratchet up flexibility across another dimension. And frequency is another example of this. So just like with transit, if the routes are more fixed, the stops are more fixed, and you're using less vehicles, maybe you could use some of those excess vehicles and resources to run on a frequency. So run your afternoon routes twice. So to accommodate students that want to stay longer for after school. So again, trading off one flexibility or service level for another. Walk further to a bus stop, but stay later if you like, and you can also get a ride home 2 hours after the regular dismissal time. I mentioned communication a little bit when I had the previous screen up, but I think that's another interesting one where we find in our work managing, in particular, highly mobile student populations and some of these, smaller sedan routes, and students experiencing homelessness, and students with special needs, and other circumstances that need a little more high touch service, that the communication, when done intentionally and persistently, can make a big difference between whether the student gets the vehicle or not. And gosh, in a place like Minnesota, where students don't like to, and I don't like to wait outside in the sub-zero weather, just getting a timely ETA of a minute before the vehicle arrives can make a big difference. So mode, again, common now, much more common, that we're thinking about deploying smaller vehicles, right? But doing so really strategically, and leveraging your core assets, filling those buses up, and then saving those higher marginal costs, more flexible, highly accommodating kinds of services for the students that really need it, right? That's the key. Payment in lieu as a mode, that's a new conception for many as far as a type of mode, a type of support, but that is something where, if we often talk with our charter schools who want to, serve an entire metro area, that if they're trying, they need to become cost sustainable, right? So they're trying to adopt a boundary and have some standard of reasonability of the extent of the service that they're going to provide. And so, saying to a family, here, we can offer you this community stop within the boundary, and or some stipend in lieu of a provided bus service, in order to reduce the burden of you transporting your own student. Or for charter schools, we work with schools in South Carolina, for example, where there's no funding provided for charter school transportation. And so, they provide nothing, but being able to offer a differentiated parent stipend, parent payment program, making all the difference between, for many families who want to attend the program and are going to try to do it, but just struggle to maintain their vehicles and pay for gas and so on. And so you can even be differentiated and smart within that. I'll give you an example of that. And then encourage walking and transit where safe and feasible. And again, this is, I'll give an example of how, being smart, understanding where that's safe to do so, not using it as a blunt instrument, but, to say, okay, all of our high school students get transit passes. Those programs can be hugely positive, but also can be highly differential and inequitable, right? If not understood what those journeys really look like and where that can be deployed safely and who it's good for and who it's not. This last dynamic, and then I'm going to pause for some Q&A, because I know now there's been a lot of new concepts here, I think. But the idea of, again, within the realm of special education, we have an idea that's understood amongst educators that we want to progressively, we're working with students to move them out of restrictive environments into the least restrictive environment but often this framework is not imposed or exercised or leveraged within the transportation realm. That is to say, once a student has door-to-door transportation, usually, or a special accommodation, usually that sticks around as they age, or irrespective of what other kinds of progress is happening within the classroom and the other work that school staff are doing with those students. So what we present here is an idea that those conversations around transportation accommodations ought to be an intentional part of this broader conversation with the student, and that you can very intentionally adjust accommodations over time in a way that's supportive of the broader aims you have to move these students to a least restrictive environment. So for example, going from a door-to-door stop to the closest, safest corner, to a normal community stop, and then, or a normal corner stop, and then maybe as the student enters high school, let's say with travel training, allowing them to, or encouraging them or supporting them to take public transit, perhaps with their peers. And so again, just a different kind of framework to think about how to differentiate. So yes, I'll pause and see if there's some here in the chat. I see from Jesse, how can a school take a differential approach where only buses or drivers that allow a CDL are allowed, or where there's no public transit? So great example of where your local, context of what's allowed, your local context of what vendor and other options are available, or just in the market, really comes into play. And this is an example of where still there's a lot that can be done, right? So being able to really, looking at first, understanding your context and your limitations, and then looking at your walk distances to stops within a school bus network. And, if you're not able to, fill up your buses, right, there's a tremendous efficiency to be gained by consolidating bus stops and having students go a little bit further in order that you can fill up those buses. But a differentiated approach would be recognizing that that's not so easy across your system, and it may vary really wildly by geography and by neighborhood context, or across programs where you might have some folks within a neighborhood, within a zone, that you can fill up a bus and still be very accommodating, and you may wish to do so. You may have others that, again, are attending schools of choice across the city, where you may you struggle to fill up those buses. They fill up with time and not with kids. And so you need to adopt a community stop policy in order to efficiently leverage those buses. So just within the design of a bus network, and this whole idea of frequency and so on, that's another example where you can do a lot within just a design of a bus network. And the idea of watching and understanding, I would gather in most environments, we know that the fastest growing, most prevalent mode of student transportation now, bar none, is parents driving their own kids. And so, recognizing if you're only able to offer school buses as the option, how about let's just look and see how actually families are using this, and maybe if there were different policies, say, about how students could move from route to route, what alternative stop options we offer families. Even again, if it's just you can ride a different bus, we give you a pass, but you will ride to an existing stop, let's say, and then you have your core home stop. That's really accommodating, nice thing that can help a lot of families, and it's just working within your existing context. How does a school handle increased costs that come from providing more personalized service on top of the costs from the current system? So these examples that I've been giving about finding efficiencies within the bus network, right? The goal is to have a really tight and efficient core system so that you can free up resources to offer more accommodating service for those that really need it. And again, it doesn't have to be just van service. There are things that you can do, right? In terms of, if your data and communications are really tight and strong, you can offer more flexibility and alternative transportation options. You can be more flexible there. You could run vehicles on a frequency. You can do a lot even with limited resources. And sometimes, sometimes districts just need to save money, or you need to right size your system to be able to work with the number of drivers that you have. We encounter that a lot. But very often we find is the savings that can be generated by some of these redesign of the core systems are being deployed, back into transportation, because now you just have a system that can provide more service at a lower marginal cost. And there's a recognition that access barriers are just so core. You need to provide access for these students to get to the high quality programs that you're offering. Okay, so let me give you some examples. So a few case studies, and this is so referencing some recent projects that we've done with Cincinnati Public Schools and others. Here's some graphics. You see Odessa High School. This was Friday Night Lights District Ector County Public Schools, RISD in West Texas that we worked with, of just showing, you can see different colored dots on different routes. These are students all with different bus stops. The activity that we did to consolidate stops, just leveraging the policy allowances that they had as far as how far students could walk to bus stops. So what we find is that over time, typically stops are just added and they just accumulate, and service levels become more and more accommodating, just as a matter of course, because of how routing systems work and how transportation departments operate. So doing this spring cleaning, this is just some really great examples here here's a bunch of kids really in close proximity. These are high school students. They can walk a little bit further. We could take these very many stops and consolidate them down to 2. And then a policy, this was just very conceptual diagram of how we had target zones. This was back at Ector County ISD, where we wanted to consolidate stops within the target zones, but also there was a strategy to eliminate stops outside the target zones and offer those families community stops within the zones. So that's a way you can differentiate using a geographic boundary. Here's an example from a recent project we did with District of Columbia Office of the State Superintendent, which operates almost exclusively these minibuses, and they provide transportation for students with special needs. But still, it was the same kind of exercise that we undertook with them, which was, let's look at your core service and how you're utilizing these assets first, right? And identified lots of opportunities for enhancing utilization, some of which included actually some of this service differentiation of not every student actually needed door-to-door transportation. There was some corner, closest safest corner or regular corner stop transportation. In DC, they didn't offer any gen ed transportation. So there was a spectrum of student needs, and so an opportunity to differentiate to create more efficiency in the core system, and then an opportunity that they had not yet fully exploited to, where they were short on CDL drivers, but they had a lot of routes with 1 or 2 kids on them, or 4 kids or less. And so there was opportunity to use both in-house and outsourced services then for, routes that were just never going to be able to be stacked. They were 2 hours long, but rather than sending a CDL driver and one of these minibuses, just send a sedan, for example, for those routes. Here's another example of a decision tree, a way of very intentionally navigating a set of choices and differential options with a school and a set of families that we work with, a school called Paul Revere Academy. It's high school students, many of whom are in foster care, but attending career and technical programming. And so limited resources, they happen to be an A for Arizona grantee. And so had designed this very innovative program, and we've helped them to manage it. But first, the idea was that they cover a broad area, but there is good public transit in Phoenix where they are. That first they would assess with each student, go to the trip planner and see what's their public transit journey. And if it met certain criteria, that was the option we're going to offer to families, and the district, the LEA would buy the passes. Okay, if not, the school had a limited budget and some vehicles and vendors with whom we were working, deploying larger vans throughout the area. And if there was, we'd see if we could accommodate a student on the van or the minibus. If so, let's add them to that. If not, and many of the students came from far afield that neither of those options were plausible, then parent stipend was the option. And even within that, there were differential payments based on distance. So students more than 10 miles would get a different rate than students within 5 miles, and students within a mile, walkers and not wouldn't get a stipend. So we don't have walkers in there, but that's part of the decision tree too. And then but the question around the stipend was, there's some families that even with a stipend don't have a car, aren't able to drive. And so then reserving, after all the other options are exhausted, reserving the very expensive door-to-door sedan service, the outsourced, to those families. And so being really sparing about that very expensive resource to being deployed for only those that need it most. Finally, just another example here of where this was with a charter school client in El Paso, Texas, and you had very limited resources. You had 2 buses that they wanted to leverage to serve as many of their families as possible. Well, again, I can't recall the exact number of students here. You could probably count them on the map, but there wasn't a way to traverse the whole geography and pick up all the students with these 2 buses. And so what we first did was, we worked with them on, okay, let's establish a boundary within which, our priority boundary, let's establish a walk zone and, ensure that those that are within this walk zone for whom it's safe to walk, that's their mode of transportation. Then the heat map you see is actually transit accessibility. And so we did an analysis to say, those within the darker purple zones could actually get to the school within 30 minutes, the somewhat lighter purple within 60 minutes, and beyond that 75 minutes. And so those that were in the 30 or 60-minute zone, we were provided transit passes, and then we were left with the remaining students to come up with routed solutions for. And so again, this is just an example of how to be really strategic before you just put a bus out there, to say, oh, how could we support families to leverage other modes first, so then we can be most economical with our scarce resources. All right, so that's right on time, right at 10 or 12:50 my time. Wanted to open it up to Q&A again, and happy to go back to any of these examples. But this is a really, really rich topic, and there's a lot of, a lot of complexity in even doing this kind of analysis, as you can see. Having a team that has the capability to do this, having the right data, having these options available in your market, having these various options like parent payments be allowable. That's why this is all very interconnected. And then you can also see a lot of our work is about, overcoming fragmentation and sharing data and getting districts and charters and others to work together, because it's really hard, but also it's a different sort of problem when you aggregate your resources or when you aggregate demand. Questions? I see one last question from the last round was, let's see, do you have any suggestions for how a transportation system can gauge demand to better align with supply? So that's a really good one. And I think there are systems, there's a lot of new systems out there that will track ridership, for example, key fobs and on backpacks and RFID cards and that sort of thing. And I mention that just because I think they're a lot of part of the popular conversation. I think that good old-fashioned surveying your parents and going out to the curb with a clipboard gets you the clipboard gets you 90% of the benefit with very little to no cost. And if that's done regularly, so that it's understood, who's actually riding, who's actually using the service, but it also has the benefit then is it's the reality is that families are using all these other modes outside of your school buses. And so if you have that system on your fleet of buses, that's only part of the picture. So it's really a part of family engagement, having better data and understanding. One of these challenges talk about data capacity and just systems at districts and charters and across systems is that a lack of data, a lack of knowledge of where families are, how to transport them, and what their actual needs are, and then their differential ability to meet those transportation needs. This is one of the core issues, and it was one of the first things I delved into in Boston. Was just one of the first aha moments was we sent out a mailer of all the students and their assignments for the beginning of the new year, just a few weeks before school was to start. And nearly half of them came back to me. They were rejected. The addresses, returned to sender. And so the recognition, the sinking realization that we had routed thousands of students, but without knowing their actual address, was such an aha moment, and informed for me so much just why there was always so much chaos at the beginning of the school year. It was about data, not understanding that people had moved or where they actually lived or how do we reach them to get them what the assignment is. Or that for other reasons that the assignment wouldn't work for them. Half of that issue getting through the first few weeks of school was just sort of sorting that out. And if we could solve that problem, we could make, you could just have baseline service that's better, and then you could get to do fun stuff like this. How did the school settle on those decision rules? How did they monitor to see if any changes were needed? So this is a great question. I think we're talking about this example. It's a work in progress, and the decision rules, we workshopped just based on, a lot of it was defined by the resources that were available. So we had budget to, do so much of this hop, skip, drive, and we could run a couple of vans. And so here's how many students we want to serve. Here's kind of our, budget. And so we're going to try to maximize public transit. We knew was a good option for some, but it wasn't going to be for others. But we wanted to offer that first, and then kind of going down the line. And yeah, and it was just then setting business rules and boundaries and criteria that we thought were reasonable. What's a reasonable ride on public transit? That's a subjective thing that every district has to decide for themselves. What's a relevant, a parent stipend amount is another interesting, question. And there's, states now are coming out with guidance in some instances around, using the federal reimbursement rate, or, or I think another relevant guidepost is what a district's, average cost per student transport is. And you can make an argument that, just what if you gave something closer to that to families? Is that better use of those funds? But of course, again, you don't want to, not sustainable to just have everybody driving in private cars. So you want to have sharing, you want to provide, the efficient resource of the bus when you can, you want to have folks walk when it's safe to do so. But it's really contextual, and, and it's the value statement and who you're trying to serve, what their real needs are, to how you answer these questions. All right, well, I think that wraps it up for our second webinar. We will look forward to seeing you at the next one, and hope you use the hub and still look for this and more resources to go up on the hub. We'll see you in a couple weeks at our next session. Thanks very much, everyone.